Hi everyone, I'm Celeste. Welcome to my YouTube channel. So here's the situation. You want to learn some more about history, but you don't know exactly where to begin. You might be saying, I love learning about history, but so many books and videos start in medias res, in the middle of things. And they presume that I have a special knowledge of a subject that I don't have. So where's really a good place to begin when you're a rank beginner? Fear not, you've come to the right place, because today I'm going to share with you some of my favorite general history resources and my approach to learning about history. Now, I'd like to state a little disclaimer up front. I am no expert. I am not a historian. I'm just an armchair reader who loves history and gets interested in falling down some historical rabbit holes in her reading, and I'm going to share that with you, okay? So if you are a highly respected professor of history that specializes in something and you've won a billion awards, scroll on. This may not be for you. However, if you are a beginner and you want to learn my approach to history, then stay tuned. I did work for 5 years as a library clerk in both the adult and the children's sections of our local library, so I am used to collecting resources for the general public. So there are some great general histories available out there, and two of my favorites are these. DK's History of Britain and Ireland, the Definitive Visual Guide. This is a fantastic general resource. If you can even believe it, I got this free from our library's discard shelf. This book goes for about $40 off the shelf, by the way, and it's not even that old. This is just a great general pictorial guide with a lot of basic information. So what these sort of general histories give you is a general bird's eye view, looking down at history, and then just waiting for you to swoop in on an era that might interest you in particular. So this sort of goes from the dawn of time until the present day. But it's a really good resource. It's got some great timelines in here. I'll just show you some of the illustrations. So it takes it period by period. For example, I want to learn about medieval weapons. Well, here you go. It gives you a really great visual display, talks a little bit about fighting and chivalry and the types of weapons used and the materials and all of that. The War of the Roses, the Battle of Culloden. You just sort of go chronologically through eras in British history. And then here's their section on modern times. So they give you a little timeline which divides each section of this book. So I love books like this. And another great one that I like to use is this one here. The Kings and Queens of England and Scotland by Plantagenet Somerset Fry. Now, if you want an indication of how old I am, I bought this book new off the shelf when it was first published. So I've had this book for decades, and it really is a great resource. And this sort of narrows your search down. Remember, you're drilling down. So we're going from general British history. In looking at this book here, you might say to yourself, I'm interested in all of this, but I would really like to sort of drill down and learn a little bit more about Queen Victoria and the Victorian era. Okay, so now, just put that down there. This places everything within the context of who was on the throne. So now you can read all about Queen Victoria and her era and different things that happened during her reign on the throne, who came before her, who came after, and just, sort of a general, concise picture of Victorian life, okay? So this book is great for doing that. So now you're interested in Victoria and in Victorian England, and you realize you'd like to see what was going on in the United States during that time period. I find that for grand, sweeping general history, I turn often to history books that have been written for younger audiences. Okay? Yes, children's books and teen books. Why? Because these resources are simple, full of images and captions, and to the point. A great place to start would be the Smithsonian Children's Encyclopedia of American History, and that would be a great general resource to sort of start learning about the United States, 1880s, 1890s, 1900. Okay, so what do you turn to next? I personally turn to a book like this, which looks at the 20th century. Here's an even bigger doorstopper called The Century by Peter Jennings and Todd Brewster. Now this book is a few years old, so some of the information may be dated, but I was able to grab this book at a discount charity shop for $4.99. This is a jumbo behemoth. It's quite heavy, so it's actually quite hard for me to just hold up like this. But what this looks at is the century from 1901 onward. This is a fabulous resource. I have great respect for the old journalist Peter Jennings, who's since passed away, but he was great in his day. And what's even neater is that I discovered that this book is actually a companion volume to a multi-part documentary series about life in the United States during the 20th century that you can watch right here on YouTube for free. And I'll post the link for that down below for you. I think it's just visually a stunning volume. And the way that Peter Jennings has divided up this book, and Todd Brewster, I'll show you the table of contents here. So he divides it into periods of 1901 to 1914, 1914 to 19, and so on. So, you know, you're taking the century, 20th century in the United States, and kind of dividing it into manageable bite-sized bits. Another great series of books are produced by Time Life Books, and of course that's Time Magazine and Life Magazine, and they join forces to bring you Our American Century, and this goes decade by decade, so each volume covers a 10-year period. The one we have here is 1900 to 1910, so this covers the dawn of flight and you know, just everyday life during this 10 years. And then the next one in the series is End of Innocence, 1910 to 1920. These contain really fascinating archival photographs from the press, famous photographs. So this, of course, shows you the advent of cinema and the suffragette movement and World War I. So if you like your history in smaller chunks, I recommend picking up the set of Decades books by Time Life. There's just some really stunning illustrations in here. Let me show you one. This is called The Good Old Summertime. Isn't that fabulous? Okay, so you're looking through this book on, let's say, 1910 to 1920, and in going through it, you happen upon suffragism. Okay, so you start reading about the suffragists. Where do you go from there? You say, you know what, I want to sort of stop in my study of the 20th century and I don't want to keep going chronologically. I want to now focus specifically on the suffragists. So what would be some good resources for you to use? Well, I recently found the winner of the National Book Award, which goes not only from a decade, but to a specific year. 1919. Okay, this is the year that changed America by award-winning author Martin W. Sandler, and it's published by Bloomsbury. So this takes a look at all of the tumultuous changes of the year 1919. And one of the subjects that it does cover is the suffrage movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment. Isn't that just a gorgeous photograph? Again, just absolutely stunning archival pictures in this book. So you can read all about the suffragist movement in here. And so now where do you go from there? You've looked at a bunch of super general resources, and then you've kind of narrowed the field going decade by decade. Now you're looking at a specific year and the passage of the 19th Amendment. Now what? I like to use pamphlets and magazines, and I'm just going to show you a few here. I have lots and lots, but we'll just start with a few of these. So for example, you might want to say, well, who was president at the time that the suffragettes were marching outside of the White House? You can look that up in here. This book is just specifically on the presidents, and it gives you just sort of a little bio of each one and a few of their achievements or problems, and what was happening in general at the time. Again, this book is published by DK, one of my favorites. So there's that. And then I also like general history magazines. This one is BBC History. So you may read in 1919 that Black women were not treated as equals to white women in the suffragist movement. And not everybody wanted Black women to have the vote. So maybe then you start thinking about Black history and looking up various issues related to that. Now, so for example, you might see in this magazine, this is the BBC, The Hidden Victorians. And this is especially about 6 different visionaries who were African Americans, all fighting for equality in the Victorian era and leading into the Edwardian era. So that would be an example of a more specific article that you could read in the BBC History magazine. You might even want to look at some of your regional and local magazines if you're curious about suffragism in your own area. Okay, so I happened to pick up this New York Archives issue, and in here there were some great articles. So this is called A Mother and Daughter Team by Carrie Lippincott, the work of 2 dynamic suffragists in Geneva, New York. I live in New York State, so this is pertinent to me and my area. So your interest can start anywhere. You can study anything that interests you whatsoever, and go from there in any direction you want. This is only meant to be my suggestion for a sort of methodical approach to get more and more down into a subject, or to let a subject blossom from one specific event. So there you have it. Some of my personal favorite history resources for if you're just starting out with history, or you need a little bit of a refresher now and then, or you're just looking for some great general reference works for your collection. We looked at some general British history, kings and queens of England and Scotland. Then we moved over to the United States and looked at the century. Then we broke that down even further into decades, starting with the 1900s and 1910s. Then we got even more specific and looked at one of those years in one of the decades and the events that took place in that year. And from there, We studied specific events and personalities through magazines, pamphlets, and other periodicals. And of course, from there, the sky's the limit. You can look at biographies, more complex historical books, and very specific subjects. So that's just how I like to approach general history. I hope it's been useful to you, and I will be back soon diving down some history rabbit holes with you, and I hope you'll join me. Thanks for being here today, and we'll see you again soon.